In September of 2014, tens of thousands of people in Hong Kong, led by then 18-year-old Joshua Wong, filled the streets, protesting proposed changes to Hong Kong's electoral system. After a 79-day standoff, the movement was shut down. 5 years later, another controversial move by Hong Kong's government. A proposed bill would allow for extraditions to mainland China. In what would be the first of many protests, an estimated 1 million people march against the bill. Days later, the situation intensifies when police use tear gas on protesters. More demonstrations. Nearly 2 million people in Hong Kong take to the streets demanding the bill be formally withdrawn. The ongoing campaign against the extradition bill is described by protesters as leaderless, often anonymous activists spreading information about demonstrations on social media apps like Telegram. The goal is to be like water, adaptable, mobile, and keeping authorities guessing. On the 22nd anniversary of Hong Kong's return to China, some protesters turned violent, trashing the building of the Legislative Council. A week later, the government pivots.
The bill is dead.
But protesters, unsatisfied with Lam's response, announced 5 demands, which include formally withdrawing the bill and calling for an independent inquiry into police actions. Violence erupts again, this time at Yuen Long train station, as men dressed in white assault protesters, among others. China ramps up its response, sending a military convoy to the Shenzhen border. Flights are suspended at Hong Kong's airport as thousands take part in sit-ins. 2 mainlanders are detained and beaten by protesters. The demonstrators reset with a peaceful march attended by an estimated 1.7 million people. But that peace doesn't last long. Police clash with protesters again last weekend, at times in the chaos, pulling out their guns. Well, joining us now to talk about this are Andrea Chun, a broadcaster and lawyer with ties to Hong Kong, and Wenran Zheng, a China expert from the University of British Columbia. Welcome to both of you. And Andrea, let me start with you. What do you think is the motivation behind these arrests?
It's very clear to me. These arrests have been made over the last day or so. I do not believe in coincidences, and therefore I think the government is trying to thwart the planned protests for tomorrow. But I think this is a wrong move, because even though these are prominent activists, including, I might add, legislators elected by the people, there are actually no leaders in this movement. So I think what they have done is actually antagonize people more, and they might provoke more protesters to come out on the streets tomorrow.
Wenran?
That is always a fear, whether the arrest would actually trigger more anger, as Andrea mentioned, and actually have more people pumped into the street. But at the same time, I think the measure is designed to curb the kind of out-of-control demonstrations and mixed with violence. After the airport occupation and the violence, the following week, we in fact had a fairly peaceful but large-scale demonstration, and then the violence coming back again. I think the authorities are trying not to let this go free and go forever. The jury is out whether the measures are effective. But for those critics who say this is totally unnecessary or this is totally unjustified, I'm not sure I agree with that, because things cannot be continuously to be out of control after so many days in Hong Kong, so many interruptions.
Andrea?
I do not agree, because the activists who have been arrested, including the legislators, one of them, Jeremy Tam, he's a pilot with Cathay Pacific, the flagship carrier of Hong Kong. He had to resign his position as a pilot because of what we call the white terror. People's livelihoods, people have been terminated as a result of their political beliefs and social media posts. These people have not been violent. The alleged crimes they have committed have not been violent crimes. In fact, Hong Kong actually has a law that allows them to detain people or question people for 48 hours without charging them with a crime. So we are not even sure if these legislators have been detained or charged with a crime. Maybe they've just simply been put out of the picture for the next 48 hours. So I don't think this curbs violence at all.
Andrew, one of the difficult things for me watching this story unfold late last night and into the day today is trying to figure out what possible evidence there was there evidence that triggered these arrests? Do you think that the Hong Kong authorities, that the police had evidence, or do you believe these arrests were arbitrary?
I think the evidence could be scant. For example, they're saying that the Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow, they were involved with this illegal occupation or assembly. Well, sure, because they did not get a permit for it, but that's why they got bail so quickly and so easily, albeit with certain conditions. So I really think the police, over the last 11 or 12 weeks, have overextended their power and ability to do whatever is in their power, to whether it is violence or whether in this case it is charges or arrests. I think some of these charges will not stick if in fact they even get charged.
One last question, and Wenrun, let's start with you on this. Do you think we're at a turning point? Do you think that things will be different this weekend?
Well, depending on how the protest and the level of protest turn out, I'm rooting for the whole situation turning into a compromise and dialogue rather than escalation. But at this moment, we do not know. One thing that we can observe and we can see is that Beijing has restrained from using further rhetoric of force potentially. So the idea that somehow we're turning into a Tiananmen kind of a situation, there's no way out, I don't think that's the situation. I think the best way to protest and to reach those goals by the protesters is to use different means of negotiating rather than using more violence. I think that would be a better way to go out.
And Andrea, the threat of violence, the violence itself, do you think that's over now in Hong Kong?
Since Carrie Lam has steadfastly refused to give in for any demands, I thought there was a bit of a softening of her position the week before, but Reuters has reported that China has said, no, do not do that. Carrie Lam, you cannot give in. So I think the violence might continue. It's sad for me to say, because Hong Kong people have not been able to achieve any of the 5 demands, including establishing an independent inquiry into the police brutality. So let's have an independent inquiry into it, but that is overwhelmingly supported by 80% of the people. And yet,
well, as we've said through the program, it is already Saturday in Hong Kong, so we'll get a clearer sense of how the weekend is shaping up in the next few hours. Andrea and Wenrun, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.